Today we're talking about the church's role in society. The church played a humongous role in medieval society. Priests were often very, very powerful. The church was even more powerful than lords and sometimes even kings in medieval society. So what did priests and the church do for these people? Number one, they taught church beliefs. They taught Christianity and the Bible to the people. They also counseled people who were having difficulties in their lives. Oftentimes, churches and priests set up hospitals to help the sick and the needy. The priests also may set up schools to teach literacy to young boys and people in the medieval society. They also played a huge role in the personal lives of these people. They often performed marriages, and marriages must be blessed in order to be recognized by the church. If you didn't have a marriage blessed by the church, it didn't really happen. They also performed baptisms, and baptisms at this time happened when people were babies. So when they were born, a baby would be baptized, and that would enable it to go to heaven if it died. If a person in medieval society died without having a baptism, the church believed that they did not go to heaven. So a baptism was very important. The church also performed funerals for these people. If you didn't have a church-blessed funeral, then you would not go to heaven. So these things were very, very important to medieval society. The church had to collect money in order to perform all these tasks or duties for these people. So what they did is they collected tithes. A tithe is 10% of your income, and it went directly to the church. So say you made $100, 10 of that went directly to the church off the top. And in doing so, the church became very, very wealthy. Some people still tithe today. Church had their own type of laws, separate from the governmental laws. It was called canon law. Canon law means church law. And the church actually had their own courts, so you could be tried in church court. If the church didn't like the way you were behaving, they could excommunicate you. Excommunication means that you were shunned from church activities. Christians could not visit your shops. They could not help you out. And so it was a very difficult time if you were excommunicated from the church. You couldn't go to church. You couldn't have a marriage. Your children could not be baptized, and you couldn't have a church burial. In other words, you were going to go to hell if you didn't get in right with the church. If a person didn't follow canon law or church law, they could be excommunicated. Excommunication means that they couldn't take part in church activities. In effect, they were shunned by the church. And not only shunned by the church, but they had to be shunned by the other people in medieval society. So for instance, if I was excommunicated, you couldn't visit me, you couldn't go into my business. That would be a very difficult time period for someone who was excommunicated. If you were excommunicated, you couldn't take part in any church activities, which meant that you couldn't be married, you couldn't have your children baptized, and you couldn't have a church funeral. In other words, you were destined to go to hell. This scared a lot of people into doing exactly what the church wanted. If a king or a lord was excommunicated, it was called an interdict. That means their whole kingdom or area could be excommunicated. So if a lord was bad, not only was he shunned by the church, but his people would be shunned. All churches in that area would close down, and this would put enormous pressure on the king or the lord to get right with the church. Their people did not want to be forced into going to hell because their lord was being an idiot in the eyes of the church. So even the strongest lord or even king would bow to this pressure of the church. Monks and nuns played a big role in society too. Monks and nuns both followed the Benedictine rule. And the Benedictine rule meant that they had a different set of laws that they had to follow. For instance, they had to follow 3 vows. a vow of obedience, a vow of poverty, and a vow of chastity. A vow of obedience meant that they had to obey whatever the abbot or the priest said. The vow of poverty meant that they had to give up their worldly possessions. They had to be poor. They couldn't go around having a lot of money or flashing money. And then thirdly, the vow of chastity, which meant that they had to be pure sexually. Religious turmoil was apparent during these times. All of the religions didn't just get along because everybody believed in God and that they were supposed to be nice. The Jews were especially persecuted or mistreated. There was a lot of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is prejudice against Jewish people. The Christians blamed the Jews for the death of Jesus Christ, and therefore they thought it was okay to persecute them. Jews would be barred from jobs, and they couldn't do certain activities within the society. They were often blamed for any problems, including things like the sicknesses that went through, including the Black Death or bubonic plague. So Jews were definitely mistreated as far back as medieval times.